Hey Reddit, my name's Daniel. I'm 24, and I never thought I'd end up one of those stories you read here. The kind where the family drama feels like something out of a bad TV movie. I always used to roll my eyes when people said family can be your worst enemy, because I figured that was just people exaggerating. Turns out, I was wrong. So, buckle up, because this isn't some quick blow-up or petty squabble. It's a story that started small, the way most disasters do, and slowly turned into something that completely blew up my life. For a bit of background, I grew up in a pretty average suburban family. My parents, Rick and Sandra, were the type who cared a lot about appearances. My mom especially. She loved to talk about how well she raised us, how tight-knit our family was, how proud she was of her two perfect kids. Those two perfect kids were me and my younger sister, Chloe. She's 21 now, and if you asked anyone outside the family, they'd probably say she's a sweetheart. Smart, bubbly, always smiling, always the center of attention. The kind of girl teachers adored and neighbors compared their own kids to. What most people didn't see was the way Chloe's charm came with a sharp edge. She was good at playing innocent when she wanted something, and she always wanted something. Growing up, she'd do things like borrow money from my wallet or blame me when she broke something, and my parents would just wave it off as typical sibling stuff. I used to think it was normal too. After all, I was the older brother. I was supposed to be the responsible one, the forgiving one, the one who set an example. That's what my mom always said anyway. Still, I didn't mind most of the time. I wasn't perfect, but I tried to be fair. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs through college, and stayed out of trouble. Meanwhile, Chloe, well, she was the family's golden girl. She didn't have to work, didn't have to pay for anything. If she wanted a new phone, she got it. A car? Done. My parents always said it was because she deserved it for keeping up her grades and being so good. I guess I was the trial run, and she was the finished product. Now, here's where things start getting interesting. My parents weren't exactly well off. We lived comfortably, but they liked to act like we were richer than we were. New furniture every few years, expensive vacations, that sort of thing. What they didn't talk about was who made that possible. My uncle, David. He's my dad's older brother, and for as long as I can remember, he's been helping my parents financially. It wasn't some huge secret, but they also didn't like to admit it. Uncle David's pretty well off. He owns a couple of businesses and has always been generous with family. He paid for my parents' mortgage when things got tight, covered Chloe's college tuition, and even helped me with my last semester when I switched majors. He's a quiet guy, the type who doesn't expect recognition. He never had kids, and I think he saw us as the closest thing he had to that. He and I have always been close. He was the one who taught me to drive, the one who helped me get my first job, and honestly, the one who treated me like an adult even when my parents still talked to me like I was a kid. But, and this part's important, he couldn't stand dishonesty. I mean, really couldn't stand it. He'd always say, money's easy to give, but trust? Once that's gone, you've got nothing left. So imagine my shock when all of this started because of something as small as a pair of diamond earrings. It happened a few months ago. Chloe had just come home from college for a long weekend, and the house was the usual circus. Mom had gone into hostess mode, cooking enough food for a family of 10, and Dad was trying to fix the Wi-Fi while yelling at me about using too much data. It was just background noise until Chloe came downstairs, holding a jewelry box like it was evidence in a crime scene. "Mom," she said, her voice shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Where are my diamond earrings?" Mom looked confused at first. "The ones Uncle David gave you for your birthday?" "Yeah, they were in this box, and now they're gone." I didn't think much of it. Things got misplaced all the time in that house. But then her eyes flicked to me. "You were in my room earlier, weren't you?" I blinked. Yeah? You asked me to grab your charger. Then maybe you saw where they went," she said, her voice tightening. There was this pause. A long, heavy pause that made my stomach twist. "Daniel," my mom said slowly, "did you take them?" It was so absurd I laughed. "What? No. Why would I take her earrings?" But they weren't smiling. My dad crossed his arms, and Chloe was looking at me like she already knew the answer. "You've been struggling with money, right?" she said. "Didn't you say last week your rent was late?" That's when I felt the first real sting. She wasn't wrong. I'd mentioned it in passing. I'd been between freelance gigs and was a little behind on my payments. But to twist that into this, I told her flat out that I didn't take them. I offered to let them search my stuff. But Chloe just kept going, spinning this story about how she saw me lingering near her dresser, how I looked nervous when she asked about the charger. It was surreal, like she'd rehearsed it. My mom's tone changed completely. "Daniel, we've done so much for you," she said, her voice shaking in that disappointed way that cuts deeper than yelling. "If you needed help, you could have just asked." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't take them. Dad just sighed. "We can talk about this later. Right now, I think you should leave the house until we figure this out." That sentence hit harder than I expected. Leave. Like I was some stranger. I remember standing there, trying to process it. I kept thinking, they'll realize how ridiculous this is. They have to. But the longer I looked at their faces, the more I realized they weren't going to. So I left. I packed a small bag, my hands shaking the whole time, and Chloe stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You should have just told the truth," she said softly, almost pitying. I didn't say anything. I just walked out. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed nonstop, texts from my parents, most of them variations of "we're disappointed" or "you need to make this right." Chloe even sent one that said, "It's not too late to apologize." I remember staring at it for a long time, wondering how someone could lie so easily, so completely. 2 days later, I got a call from Uncle David. He asked how I was doing, and I tried to play it off, but he could tell something was wrong. He always could. Finally, he said, "Daniel, your mother mentioned there was some kind of incident?" My throat went dry. I didn't know what she'd told him, and part of me didn't want to find out. But that was the moment everything started to shift. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the start of something much bigger, something that would tear down everything my parents had built their image on. And the best part? They had no idea what was coming. When I picked up that call from Uncle David, I didn't realize I was about to step into a whole new level of family insanity. His tone was calm, like it always was, but underneath I could hear that edge of concern, the kind that told me he already knew more than he was letting on. "Your mother said there was some misunderstanding about Chloe's jewelry," he said after a moment of polite small talk. "She made it sound like a simple mix-up, but, Daniel, that's not the way she usually talks about small things." "What happened?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to keep quiet. My parents had already made it clear they didn't want me dragging anyone else into this. But something about David's voice, steady, direct, patient, made me break. So I told him everything. Not just about the earrings, but the way my parents hadn't even asked for my side. How they'd told me to leave. How Chloe had been smug about it. How my mom kept texting me like I was some shameful secret they needed to manage. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. Just silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end, slow and measured. Then finally, in a low voice, he said, "That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding to me. That sounds like betrayal." Something in my chest cracked open then. I didn't even realize how much I'd been holding in until that moment. I laughed, bitterly, not out of humor. "Yeah, well, that's our family, right? Always protecting the favorite." "Don't say that," he replied quietly. "No one should be treated like that. Especially not by their own parents." It was a strange moment, comforting, but also humiliating. Because deep down, I still wanted to believe my parents were decent people. I didn't want to see them as cruel, or petty, or blind. I wanted to think this was some one-time lapse in judgment. But that illusion was about to crumble. The next week was brutal. I stayed at my friend Ethan's place while I tried to figure things out. My parents didn't contact me except for one message from my dad. "When you're ready to be honest, we'll talk." That one stung more than the rest. It wasn't just that they didn't believe me. It was that they chose not to. They'd decided I was guilty, and that was the end of it. Meanwhile, Chloe's social media was full of smiling selfies and family dinner nights. I saw one post where she was wearing a different pair of diamond earrings, newer, shinier, and the caption said, "Some things are irreplaceable, but I'm learning to move on." The comments were full of sympathy. People saying things like, "You're so strong," and "Who could ever do that to you?" I wanted to scream. Uncle David called again a few days later. He said he wanted to talk in person. We met at a quiet diner he liked, the kind of place that still had checkered floors and old coffee mugs. When I sat down, he was already there, sipping black coffee and watching the door like he'd been waiting for me. He didn't waste time. "I spoke to your parents," he said. "They told me they don't want you coming around the house until you've made amends." "Do you know what that means?" "Yeah," I said bitterly. It means confess to something I didn't do. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. That's what I thought. Then he leaned back and sighed. I've always tried to help your family because I believe they were good people who just needed a little support. But what they've done to you, that crosses a line for me. I didn't know what to say. There was a part of me that wanted to defend them, even then. I just shrugged and muttered. They probably think they're doing the right thing. David gave me this look, steady, sad, but sharp. No, Daniel. Doing the right thing doesn't look like this. After that, we talked for hours. Or rather, he talked, and I mostly listened. He told me stories about my dad when they were kids, about how he'd always been a bit proud, always cared too much about appearances. He's always wanted to look like the successful one, David said. Even when I offered to help, he'd take it but act like it was his own doing. I let it slide because I figured it was harmless pride. But now I see how that pride has poisoned your family. The conversation left me shaken. I'd always thought of my dad as stern, maybe a little controlling, but not malicious. Now I wasn't sure anymore. A few days later, my mom texted me again, asking if I could come by to talk things out. For a second, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was it. The apology, the moment they realized how wrong they'd been. I told Uncle David about it, and he just said, "Go, but keep your eyes open." When I got there, everything felt off. Chloe was on the couch, scrolling her phone, not even pretending to look guilty. Mom greeted me like she was hosting a guest, not welcoming home her son. Dad stayed silent. "Daniel," Mom began, clasping her hands together. "We just want to move past this whole situation. It's been stressful for everyone." "Great," I said. "So we're done accusing me?" She smiled that tight, insincere smile that made my stomach twist. "Well, sweetie, it's just, without proof, it's hard to know what really happened. Chloe still feels violated, and we can't just dismiss her feelings." "I didn't take them," I said flatly. Dad finally spoke up, voice low but sharp. "Then where did they go?" "I don't know, Dad. Maybe she lost them. Maybe someone else took them." Chloe crossed her arms and said, "Yeah, because random burglars always break in just to steal one pair of earrings." It went downhill fast. Every time I spoke, Mom would cut me off, or Dad would twist my words. Chloe played the victim perfectly. Tears, trembling voice, the whole act. It was like being gaslit in real time. Then came the part that really broke me. Mom said, "Your uncle called us the other day. He said he's worried about you. I told him you're having some personal issues, but we're trying to help you. You should be careful what you say to him, Daniel. He doesn't need to be dragged into our family problems." That's when I realized what this was about. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about losing David's support. "Is that what this is?" I asked, my voice rising. "You don't care if I'm telling the truth. You just don't want him to know what's really going on." "Watch your tone," my dad snapped. "No," I said, standing up. "I'm done watching my tone. I'm done pretending this family's perfect. You didn't even ask for my side before throwing me out, and now you want to pretend this is just some misunderstanding." "Daniel, sit down," Mom hissed. But I didn't. I turned to Chloe, who was still dabbing at fake tears. "You know what you did. You know I didn't take those earrings." She met my eyes then, just for a second, and there was something there, something cold and satisfied. "You're right," she said quietly, almost too quietly for my parents to hear. "But they'll never believe you." I froze. Before I could react, Mom jumped in, scolding me for intimidating my sister, and Dad told me to get out until I can act like an adult. I left again, this time shaking, furious, and completely done. That night, I told Uncle David everything. Every word, every manipulation, every cruel twist. He listened without interrupting, but I could feel the anger in his silence. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then he said, "Thank you for telling me. Leave the rest to me." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought maybe he'd just confront them, or stop helping financially for a while. But what I didn't realize was that this was the moment everything changed, the moment the balance of power in our family quietly, decisively shifted. Because from that day on, David stopped calling them. He stopped sending the checks, the tuition payments, the mortgage assistance, all of it, gone overnight. And though I didn't see it right away, the fallout was coming. At first, they acted like nothing was wrong. Social media posts still showed happy dinners, still painted the picture-perfect family. But I knew the truth, and soon, the cracks began to show. It started with missed payments, then hushed arguments, then desperate calls that I didn't answer. And as their perfect image began to crumble, I realized something strange about revenge. It doesn't always start with anger. Sometimes it starts with silence. But that silence wouldn't last long. Because when they finally came to me, when they showed up on my doorstep, looking for the person they'd thrown away, everything would come to the surface. And by then, I wasn't the same person they thought they could control. After that last phone call with Uncle David, everything went quiet, eerily quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows an explosion, the kind that makes you realize just how much noise you'd been living with before. For the first time in my life, my parents weren't calling, texting, or guilt-tripping me. They'd gone completely dark. No, we're disappointed messages. No, you owe your sister an apology. Just nothing. At first, it felt like peace. I remember waking up one morning at Ethan's apartment, sunlight slipping through the blinds, and realizing it was the first time in weeks that my chest didn't feel tight. I didn't have to brace myself for another confrontation, another manipulation. For a few seconds, I let myself believe things might finally calm down. But reality has a way of creeping back in. I'd been staying with Ethan for over a month at that point. He was a good friend, patient, never pried too much, but I could feel that I was overstaying my welcome. I tried to pay rent, but he refused. Still, I could see the strain whenever he'd come home from work and I was still sitting at his kitchen table, scrolling job listings, nursing cold coffee. "Man, you've got to get out of here," he said one night, half joking, half serious. "Not because I don't want you here, but because you deserve to start fresh. You're letting them live rent-free in your head." He wasn't wrong. I'd been stuck in this emotional purgatory, too angry to move on, too tired to fight. My parents' betrayal had gutted me in ways I didn't fully understand. It wasn't just that they believed Chloe's lie. It was that they'd made it clear who mattered more. Who always mattered more. But Ethan's words stuck with me. The next morning, I woke up early, shaved, put on the one clean shirt I had left, and decided to start rebuilding. I didn't have much, just a couple hundred in my account, a beat-up car, and an old laptop, but I had something my parents never thought I'd use: my independence. I found a small studio apartment on the edge of town. It was nothing fancy: peeling paint, a leaky faucet, and neighbors who argued at odd hours. But it was mine. Signing that lease felt like a quiet declaration. I might have been thrown out, but I wasn't broken. I picked up work wherever I could: freelance graphic design, odd jobs, even some night shifts at a local print shop. The days were long and lonely, but there was a strange freedom in it. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. I didn't have to worry about disappointing anyone. Every bill I paid, every meal I cooked, every small step I took toward stability, it all felt like proof that I could survive on my own terms. Uncle David checked in occasionally, never pushing, just offering quiet encouragement. "I'm proud of you," he said one afternoon when I told him I'd signed a contract for a steady design gig. "You're doing exactly what you should, building your own life." "Trying to," I said, smiling faintly. "Still feels like I'm climbing uphill, though." "That's how it's supposed to feel," he replied. "The difference is, this time you're climbing for yourself." That stuck with me. Months went by. My parents didn't reach out once. But I heard things, small whispers from mutual friends, an overheard comment at the grocery store, even a voicemail from an old neighbor who said, "I ran into your mom at church. She didn't look too good. Everything okay between you guys?" I didn't reply. What could I say? The truth was, they weren't okay. Uncle David had quietly cut off all financial support. Chloe's tuition payments stopped. The mortgage help stopped. Even the car payments he used to make for my dad stopped. I didn't know all the details at the time, but I could sense it. There was this ripple effect, like a slow collapse happening in the distance that I could only hear echoes of. Then came the moment that really hit me. It was early spring when I got a text from Chloe. Just one line: "Are you happy now?" I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what she meant. Then I saw her next post on social media, something about taking a temporary break from school to focus on mental health. I shouldn't have cared, but part of me still did. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something heavier. Maybe pity. Maybe regret that things had come to this. I typed out a dozen replies, ranging from angry to sympathetic, but deleted them all. I wasn't going to feed the fire again. Instead, I poured everything into my work. I picked up more clients, built a small portfolio, even started a little freelance studio from my apartment. It was humble, mostly local businesses needing logos or posters, but it was steady. And with each project, each payment, Each thank you message, I felt a piece of myself knit back together. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, though. When I'd sit on my couch with takeout and think about how easy it used to be, Sunday dinners, family jokes, movie nights that now felt like lies. I'd scroll through old photos on my phone and wonder how I'd missed all the signs. One night, I got a call from Uncle David again. "Daniel," he said softly, "I ran into your mother today." My stomach twisted. "Oh, how'd that go?" "She didn't recognize me at first," he said, a hint of irony in his tone. "Looked right through me in the grocery store. When she finally did, she smiled like everything was fine. Then she asked if I'd heard from you." I exhaled. "And what did you say?" "I told her you were doing well," he said, "and that you didn't need anything." He paused. She looked surprised. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how my mother had looked through him like he was a stranger. How she'd only asked about me when she needed to. The thought hurt more than I wanted to admit. But there was also a small, stubborn spark inside me that refused to let that pain define me anymore. I started going to a local community center that offered workshops for young professionals. It sounds corny, but those sessions changed everything. I met people who were struggling in their own ways. People rebuilding after bad relationships, lost jobs, family fallouts. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the only broken one in the room. There was one person I met there who stood out, a woman named Lila. She was around my age, a photographer with this quiet confidence that made people instantly comfortable. We started working together on small projects. She'd take photos, I'd design ads, and before long, we were spending late nights talking about everything and nothing. One evening, after we'd finished a shoot, she said something that hit harder than she probably realized. "You talk about your family like you're still waiting for them to show up." I froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged gently. "Like part of you still expects them to knock on your door and say sorry." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She was right. That conversation forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. I couldn't move forward while still looking back. I couldn't rebuild my life while secretly waiting for an apology that might never come. So, I started letting go. It wasn't some grand gesture. No symbolic bonfire of family photos or dramatic speeches. It was quieter than that. I stopped checking Chloe's social media. I deleted old messages. I stopped replaying every argument in my head. And slowly, something shifted. I started waking up earlier, going for runs, cooking real meals instead of instant noodles. My business began to grow, not overnight, but steadily. I got referrals, repeat clients, even a few contracts that paid better than anything I'd done before. It wasn't about proving anything to my parents anymore. It was about proving it to myself. By the end of the year, I'd moved into a better apartment, still modest, but bright and clean and filled with things I had earned. I bought a secondhand couch, a few plants, and a framed print of a quote Uncle David once said to me. "You can't build peace on someone else's approval." I still thought about my family sometimes. It's impossible not to. But the pain had dulled into something quieter, something that didn't control me anymore. I didn't forgive them, not yet. But I wasn't living in their shadow either. Then, one rainy evening, I came home to find a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting stopped me cold. I'd know it anywhere. It was from my mother. The envelope was soft from the damp, the ink slightly smudged. I turned it over in my hands for a long time, unsure whether to open it or throw it away. Part of me didn't want to know what it said. Part of me needed to. Finally, I sat down, tore it open, and began to read. It started with the words, "We need to talk about your uncle." And just like that, the quiet life I'd been building began to tremble at its edges again. The letter smelled faintly of my mother's perfume, that same floral scent she used when I was a kid, the one that used to mean comfort. Now it just made my stomach twist. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time before I finally unfolded the pages. Her handwriting was neat, careful, like she'd rewritten it a few times before sending it. "Daniel," it began. "I know this letter might surprise you, but I didn't know how else to reach you. Your uncle has stopped speaking to us, and we don't understand why. Your father's been under so much pressure lately, and Chloe is struggling at school without his financial support. I don't know what's happened between you and David, but if there's any chance you can talk to him, maybe you can help us fix this. We're still your family. Please don't turn your back on us." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done to me, just a request for help, dressed up in guilt and sentimentality. I read it 3 times. By the 4th, my hands were trembling. Not from sadness, but from something sharper. Anger, yes, but also clarity. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because their safety net was gone. For the first time, I saw the full picture. My parents had built their entire sense of stability on Uncle David's generosity, and now that foundation had crumbled. The perfect facade they'd spent years maintaining was cracking, and they were looking for someone to plaster it back together. But I wasn't that person anymore. I sat there for a long while, the letter spread out on the table, my tea going cold beside it. 1,000 memories flooded back. Birthdays where Chloe got expensive gifts and I got practical ones. Arguments where I was told to be the bigger person. The night they threw me out without a shred of doubt. They'd built their comfort on my compliance. Every time I'd forgiven them, they'd taken it as permission to hurt me again. And now, for the first time, they needed something from me. That thought lit a slow, deliberate spark inside me. Not the kind of wild anger that burns out quickly, but a steady heat, the kind you can forge something from. I called Uncle David that evening. He answered on the second ring. "Daniel," he said warmly. "Good to hear your voice." "Got a letter from Mom," I said flatly. He didn't sound surprised. I wondered when that would happen. "She said you stopped speaking to them, that they don't understand why." There was a pause on the line, and then a low chuckle. Of course that's what she said. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for months. "How bad is it for them?" He sighed. "They've been struggling. Your father took on a loan to cover the mortgage. Chloe's tuition was unpaid for 2 months before she took a leave of absence. Your mother's still trying to maintain appearances, but the cards are falling." I swallowed hard. "And you're okay with that?" "I'm not enjoying their pain, Daniel," he said quietly. "But I am done rewarding their behavior. Sometimes, the only way people learn is when the safety net is gone. That should have been enough, justice by omission." But my mind wouldn't rest. For the first time, I didn't want to be passive. I didn't want to just watch the consequences happen. I wanted to shape them. I thought about it all night. The hurt, the lies, the way Chloe had looked at me that day, smug, certain she'd won. I wanted to take that certainty and turn it into doubt. I wanted them to see the truth in a way they couldn't twist. And that's when the idea began to form. It started small, a thought, then a plan, then a dozen little steps that began to take shape in my mind. I wasn't out for blood. I just wanted the truth to come out, undeniable and clean. But I also knew my parents. They didn't believe in truth unless it came wrapped in humiliation. So maybe, I thought, it was time they got a taste of their own medicine. The first step was information. Uncle David had always been careful with his finances, but he trusted me. Over the next few weeks, we met often, sometimes at that old diner, sometimes at his home office. I told him I wanted to help with some of his business projects. It wasn't a lie exactly. I didn't want to learn, and he was happy to mentor me. But it also gave me access to something I knew would matter later: records, payments, proof of just how much he'd done for them over the years. Every mortgage payment, every tuition transfer, every loan that was never repaid. Decades of quiet generosity, all neatly documented. As I organized those files, I couldn't help feeling a bitter sort of awe. My parents had taken thousands from him, sometimes under the guise of emergencies that didn't even exist. I found notes from years ago where David had written reminders like "cover car payment for Rick," again, or "Sandra says roof repair," but no invoice yet. They hadn't just leaned on him, they'd used him. One night, as I sat in my small apartment with a pile of those documents spread across the floor, I realized I had something powerful, the truth, in black and white. But truth alone wouldn't make them see. They'd always been masters at twisting narratives. I could almost hear my mother's voice already. "Oh, David offered to help. We never asked." No, I needed a moment where they couldn't spin it. A moment that revealed not just their lies, but their hypocrisy. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A few weeks later, Chloe posted an announcement online. She was throwing herself a small celebration for her 22nd birthday at a fancy restaurant downtown, an event sponsored, apparently, by close family friends. The caption under her photo read, "Back on my feet and feeling grateful for those who truly support me." Something about it made my jaw clench. My parents were tagged in the post, smiling beside her like nothing had ever happened. I knew they couldn't afford that dinner, not without someone footing the bill, which meant someone else was being used again. That's when it hit me. This was the moment. I reached out to Uncle David the next morning. "I need your help," I said. With what? Setting the record straight. He didn't answer right away. I could almost hear him thinking. Then he said, "Tell me what you have in mind." Over the next hour, I laid it out, every detail. It wasn't dramatic or cruel, it was precise. We wouldn't shout or accuse. We wouldn't need to. The plan was simple. Make the truth undeniable, in front of the very people who'd been fed lies for years. David listened in silence. When I finished, he said softly, "You've thought this through." "I have." He exhaled, long and slow. "I won't stop you. In fact, I'll help you. But Daniel," his voice softened, "make sure this isn't just about revenge. Make sure it's about closure." "I think it's both," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." In the weeks leading up to Chloe's birthday dinner, I prepared carefully. I wasn't just gathering documents. I was gathering witnesses. The family friends Chloe mentioned? I knew some of them. Neighbors, church acquaintances, people who'd always thought my family was picture perfect. I reached out to a few under the guise of catching up, asking harmless questions that led to casual truths. "Oh, yes," one of them said. "Your father mentioned how generous David's been all these years. Such a blessing to have him." "Generous," I said. "How so?" "Oh, well, the tuition, the mortgage, the loan for their business. He's practically family." That's what I wanted. Confirmation that their dependence on him wasn't a secret, just conveniently forgotten when it suited them. Meanwhile, I worked with David to arrange one final gesture, a quiet contribution that would speak louder than any confrontation. He agreed, though he didn't ask for the details. "Just don't go too far," he warned. "They're still your family, even if they've lost their way." I nodded. "I won't destroy them," I said. "I just want them to see what they've become." By the time Chloe's birthday arrived, I was ready. I hadn't been invited, of course, but I knew where it was being held. An upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with dim lighting, live piano, and servers who pretended not to notice drama brewing at the next table. I wasn't planning to crash the dinner. That would have been too easy, too obvious. Instead, I'd arranged something quieter, something that would unfold naturally, like fate catching up. Uncle David would be there, not as a guest, but as the silent storm they never saw coming. And I would be nearby, just close enough to watch the truth finally walk into the room they'd built on lies. What happened that night? Well, that's where everything truly began to unravel. By the time Chloe's birthday dinner arrived, I was calm, eerily calm. Months of planning, organizing, and waiting had honed me into a state of quiet precision. This wasn't about anger anymore. It wasn't about shouting, slamming doors, or humiliating anyone in the heat of the moment. This was about facts, timing, and letting the truth speak louder than anything else. I arrived downtown a few blocks away from the restaurant, carrying nothing but a folder with carefully organized documentation and a small, discreet speakerphone connected to David's line. I watched from across the street as my parents walked into the lobby, Chloe in tow, all smiles for the cameras they'd made themselves accustomed to pretending for. Their behavior was polished, practiced, exactly the type of image they wanted the world to see. I called David. "Are you ready?" I whispered into the phone. "Always," he replied calmly. "Remember, slow and steady. Let them unravel themselves." Inside the folder were decades worth of proof. Tuition payments, mortgage assistance, car payments, emergency loans, all neatly dated and accounted for. I had also lined up statements from neighbors, family friends, even teachers from Chloe's college, who could confirm the truth of David's generosity. It wasn't malicious, it was undeniable, concrete evidence. The plan was simple. Chloe would be at the center of attention, surrounded by family and friends. Mom and Dad would bask in the warm glow of approval and pride, convinced they had maintained control. And then, slowly, steadily, the facade would collapse. I entered the restaurant casually, blending in with the crowd outside. I had an appointment for an unrelated meeting upstairs, a perfect excuse if anyone noticed me lurking. From my vantage point near the window, I could see everything. The birthday cake, the champagne, the speeches Chloe was about to give. I pressed the small button on my phone. David's voice filled the private speakerphone I'd hidden under the table where he would be seated later, waiting for the perfect cue. "Good evening," David said, calm, even, but with an unmistakable authority. "I hope everyone is enjoying the party. There's something I need to clarify regarding Chloe's tuition, the mortgage, and a few other things." My parents froze mid-cheer, smiles faltering. Chloe's hand gripped her glass tighter. I felt a little thrill of anticipation. I hadn't realized how much I wanted them to feel that exact moment of dread. I've been providing financial support for your family for years, David continued. Every mortgage payment, every tuition installment, every emergency loan you've relied on. I did it quietly because I trusted your honesty, but I cannot continue to support you while lies are being told. My mom's lips parted, then pressed tightly together. Dad's face went pale. Chloe's expression changed from gleeful celebration to a flicker of panic. I'm not here to punish, David said firmly, but I will make sure the truth is clear. He pressed another button on his phone, and a discreet projector flickered to life, displaying a timeline of all payments he had made over the years. The numbers were staggering. Mortgage, tuition, car loans, and small emergency handouts. They were all accounted for. Each entry had a date, a note, a proof of transaction. The restaurant fell silent. Guests murmured, some whispering in shock. My parents' friends glanced at them with confusion, the first cracks in the perfectly curated image of wealth and control starting to appear. What is this? My father stammered. His voice was tight, defensive. David's eyes were steady. This is the truth. Your financial security has been built on my generosity for years. Every time you ignored Daniel, accused him unfairly, or favored Chloe for the wrong reasons, you were standing on my support. And now, Daniel has shown me the proof of what's really happened. Lies have consequences. I watched my mother's hands tremble slightly as she reached for her glass, trying to maintain composure. But it was too late. The timeline flashed across the wall, each transaction undeniable, each date and note a silent indictment. Chloe, usually quick to deflect blame, suddenly realized she had no allies. She looked around at the silent diners, then at David, then finally at me. Her eyes widened with a mix of fear and disbelief. You knew? She whispered, voice barely audible. I knew. I said simply, almost softly. I knew from the beginning. The room felt heavy, almost electric, with the weight of the revelation. My parents tried to speak at once, voices overlapping, but the effect was minimal. Words didn't matter anymore. The evidence was absolute. Years of deception and favoritism had been documented and exposed in front of everyone they had wanted to impress. What about me? Chloe finally asked, the bravado completely gone, replaced by a raw, frightened curiosity. Why didn't you tell anyone? I shook my head. I wanted you to see it for yourself. I wanted you to understand the cost of lying. You've been cared for, supported, and elevated by someone else's generosity, and you used it to hurt me. Now you see the reality, David added calmly. And this is why I stopped supporting you. Not just for Chloe, but for everyone who thinks trust and honesty are optional. My parents were scrambling, but the panic in their eyes betrayed the truth. This was over. The life they had built on appearances, the golden image of the perfect family, they were watching it crumble from the inside. The humiliation wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, but it was absolute. I stayed quiet, letting them unravel in front of their friends and family, letting the weight of evidence sink in. No yelling, no accusations, no petty revenge. Just the truth, undeniable, calm, and final. By the end of the evening, Chloe had quietly excused herself. My parents were left speechless, their friends whispering sympathetically to one another, realizing perhaps for the first time the real story behind the perfect family facade. And I walked away from the restaurant as the tension reached its peak, letting the aftermath unfold without me. In the following weeks, things settled in a way I hadn't dared imagine. My parents were forced to face reality. They had no safety net, no unearned favors, and no ability to manipulate situations to their advantage. Chloe had to take responsibility for her tuition and, for the first time, face financial reality herself. My parents had to confront the consequences of choosing appearances over truth. And I didn't just survive. I rebuilt my life. My business grew, my friendships strengthened, and I finally felt the independence I had longed for. Uncle David and I remained close, but the difference now was that I wasn't just a beneficiary of his generosity. I was his partner in fairness and integrity. One quiet evening, I sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below. I thought about the months of betrayal, humiliation, planning, and patience. And I realized something crucial. Revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about reclaiming myself, asserting the truth, and showing that I would no longer be the victim of their entitlement. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air on my face. My phone buzzed, a notification from a friend, nothing important. But for the first time in years, I felt completely, undeniably at peace. And in that moment, I smiled, because I finally understood, some victories aren't loud, aren't messy, and aren't about revenge. They're about standing tall while the truth quietly takes its course. The real justice wasn't in what they lost, it was in what I gained. And I had gained everything.